Hey everyone, this is Chess on the Brain with National Master David Bennett. We have a really interesting game to analyze today, submitted by another incognito user. We have Nietsoj against Rookatronic. Now this is interesting. They've been doing some practice games. This was their second practice game, and so I'm not going to dox who this is, but just to show you their chess.com profile. I think that's legit. This is their Nietsoj's profile from Sweden. And they provided this really interesting checklist, a Patzer's checklist version 2, things that they use to avoid blundering, which for the most part it seemed like they succeeded in avoiding during this game. So key thing they do, first, check opponent's move. Is it safe? Do I have a tactic? Do I understand all the things the move does? Is my reply forced? 2, time management, check the clock. That's my downfall, something that I've had to work on over the years. 3, what imbalances exist? Using the Jeremy Silman technique, and I'm sure others as well have used that. That's very good. 4, do I have a plan? Is there a simple refutation? Okay, good. 5, what are my candidates? My candidate moves. What are my options? Look for a better move. As Lasker said, when you see a good move, look for a better move. 6, compare and eliminate candidates. Okay, so we call that pruning the tree. We're pruning our calculation tree, trying to arrive at the best moves as efficiently as we can. So A, is it safe? B, have I calculated to quiescence? And C, have I evaluated the resulting position? And 7, visualize the intended move. Is it safe? Okay, that sounds like a good way to go. Is it safe? Checks, captures, threats, the seeds of tactical destruction. I like it. So yeah, I usually say when you're looking at tactics, first look at capture checks, then checks, then captures, then threats, and then quiet moves lastly. I wrote a blog about that one that maybe you'll find useful. But I think this is great stuff. So this is pretty much aligns with what I've done. So let's jump right into the game. We have Nietsoj versus Rookatronic, so these training partners. And actually, I really appreciate what they did is Nietsoj wrote me analysis of the game. So I can directly look at that analysis and respond to it here. So I wrote down some of my own thoughts in brackets, and I with the signature DB after each one. So let's look at Nietsoj's thoughts, and I'll give you my responses to it. So I didn't use the computer at all for this. This is purely about the ideas. Let's get into it. So knight f3, Nietsoj says, a flexible opening choice aimed to avoid theory. The aim of the game is to work on thought process and not remember theory. Okay, cool. So we're not even gonna look in the opening. We're just gonna play the game. We'll play chess. And that's what chess 960 Fischer came up with is really good because there's no opening theory in that. Unfortunately, in regular chess, we have a little bit of theory, or at least the ideas behind some of these lines, like for example, the King's Indian attack. So we have g6, g3, it says a modern approach, toying with the idea of playing a King's Indian attack with g3. We can do a lot of things. It's very flexible. Bishop g7, bishop g2, knight f6. Okay, so far symmetry. And now d4. Both players have avoided the center, Nietsoj says, and I thought that I would be mistaken if I did not stake a claim. Makes sense. I mean, there's so many ways you can play. Now, if you wanted to go for a King's Indian attack, you could play d3 with the idea of going for e4. Oh, I guess we can't use arrows on this one, but with the idea of going for e4. You can also transpose into an English type setup with c4. I think you can't go wrong with d4. That's good. Castles, c4. Okay, now we have a more traditionally d4 type setup against sort of a King's Indian defense, but where we respond with the fianchetto. Now, of course, well, King's Indian would be more after d6, so it depends on what black does. In this case, black says, so Nietsoj says, that move, huh? Inviting a Benoni. So that is more of a Benoni setup. Actually, c6 is interesting as well, and this would be the modern Grunfeld. The Grunfeld is defined by this d5 move. Fischer played that a lot. Now the modern Grunfeld would be c6, preparing for d5. And you see that a lot in these situations where both sides have fianchettoed their bishops. So that could have been an interesting attempt. Now we have c4, d5, c5, and then d5 is played. So Nietsoj, or we'll say our student, in this case, our student chose to go d5, bypass the pawn, gaining space. Now remember, when you push that pawn, though, you do open up this diagonal. Where's the bishop going? You do open up this diagonal for the bishop by pushing it. Another approach is simply to castle. We would call this the anti-Benoni, where you just say, I'm going to ignore your pawn on c5. If you want to go ahead and take it, I'll just take it back. And you might even transpose into something like a Maroczy bind, where that pawn gets on e4. Try to get that pawn on e4 and just stop black from striking back in the center with d5. So that could be a possibility. Or maybe they would strike back immediately. But that would be interesting. So, but d5 is really white is saying, hey, I'm going to assert my control in the center. I'm going to push a little bit, gain some space, and see what you're going to do about it. So black builds a pawn chain, d6. We're in a typical type of Benoni setup. Knight goes to c3. Okay, good, developing. Bishop goes to f5. Usually in the Benoni, you'll see black doing a couple of things. They'll usually either go e6 and try to trade down in the center, which will allow them to open up their e-file. So once you take this, rook is going to come out, open up the e-file, put a little pressure on the d5 pawn. We're using the chessbase app now. This is a chessbase program. A little different from, I was using Chess before, so I'm getting used to this. I haven't used it for a while. The other way is to play b5. That usually comes up, maybe after a6, for example. It makes auto moves. So after a6, then we can try and get a b5 in. That's possible as well. Sometimes the knight will also go to a6 and then c7, supporting again that push. Okay, there goes the knight. All right, so after d5, d6, knight c3, bishop f5. And now Nietsoj says, I reached a similar position in the game a few weeks earlier with a pawn on e3 coming here, and a bishop on e2 is over here. The bishop became misplaced and pushed back in that game after knight d2 and e4. Oh, I see. So they're saying that the knight went to d2 and ended up attacking the bishop on f5, which is what they try and do in this game as well. Okay, so we have, yeah, I'm not so sure about that bishop on f5. Again, that's not really the typical plan for black in these positions. So again, you don't need to know the exact moves, but it is important to know the ideas in each opening. And I'm not sure about this idea, bishop f5, because the bishop seems like it's just going to get in trouble there. So castles. Okay, I did not think that the knight d2 idea worked in this position, so I chose a different option. My plan is to follow up with rook e1, e4, and perhaps even e5. This would allow me to push his pieces back and open up the long diagonal for my bishop. Yeah, I like the e4 to e5 idea, but you have to insist on your ideas. So for example, they give knight d2, Nietsoj says after knight d2, queen d7, for example, e4, they don't like bishop h3. Sure, that's kind of annoying, even though theoretically that's a bad, our bishop g2 is a bad bishop getting traded off. But I understand there might be some weaknesses in white's position. But let's not give up on that so quickly. Of course, we don't have to let black do that. So I was looking at this a little more. I'm like, wait, why don't, if they do queen d7, if you're so worried about that, just go h3. Where's that bishop going now? Now you're actually threatening to do what? To trap that bishop. So what I say here is this may refute black's setup with g4 imminent, not to mention e4. Yeah, we don't even need g4. We'll just play e4 and trap the bishop. Can't go to g4, can't go to h3, can't go to e6. So that bishop is really misplaced on f5. Maybe the queen would have wanted to go to c8. In this case, the queen will have to move out of the way. And sometimes, like for example, let's say the queen does go to c8. You might even just castle and move your king. This actually happens in some type of Benoni setups, where you just play king f1. Because you don't want to move your rook away, you don't want to lose the h-pawn. But you just go, let's say that whatever black does, I don't know, let's say they move the knight out or something. Let's say they go to a6 to go to c7. Okay, just keep going. And let's get to h2. And now everything is protected on the king side, because this is a closed position. In a closed position like this, we have time to maneuver quite a bit. And then white can proceed with those plans of pushing the e-pawn, pushing the f-pawn. No auto moves. I'm not going to let it do that auto move on me. That gets annoying. So Yeah, you have to insist on your ideas. Don't just look at a line and say, oh, it doesn't work. Can't do it. Well, that's one line, but chess is complicated. There's lots of options to consider. So don't give in to that. Queen d7, not e4, h3. Challenge your opponent. Say, what are you going to do about it? I'm not afraid of you. What are you going to do about that silly bishop on f5? Make them move away, and then you can go after the bishop. So let's see. Instead, something good ended up happening in the position, though. Oh, another thing, let's see. Okay, after 90, I'll get to that. After 94, I expected this move, they say. Threatens to take twice on c3, and if I take, my bishop may be tied down to defend the b pawn. So you're worried about if you take on e4, then that bishop on g7 is really going to open up, attacking the b2 pawn right there. I could see that. Yeah, that could be very strong, which is yeah, that's one of the drawbacks of pushing your pawn to d5. You're going to kind of have to live with that. Sometimes you might even just end up moving your rook out of the way or something. But that bishop on g7 is going to exert its influence on the diagonal until you trade it off with your bishop, if that's what you want to do. So you just kind of have to live with that. But I think what you don't want to do is allow black to double your pawns, and then it's not exerting influence on b2. Now it's exerting influence on c3. So that might even be worse because now that pawn is fixed on c3. Again, I'm going to keep on coming back to this idea of pawn structure. That's a fixed pawn. That's really an asset. I'm not going to take it yet, but it's a long-term pressure on that pawn. That's an asset for black. It's a deficit for white. So yeah, we lose flexibility in the position as well. Sure, for now you theoretically open up the b5 by taking this way. I'm not sure it's enough for it because this b6 pawn, you can easily go here, can hold on to that pawn. It shouldn't be a problem for black. So in this case, yeah, white have some space, but there's also weaknesses, and black just has that nice solidity in the position, kind of like in the Anand game that we looked at, in the Anand game, where that solidity really helped him out against Kamsky. Okay, so what can we do instead of queen b3? I said, yeah, I said, doesn't that lead to the same issues? So I said, take some time on critical positions like this. It could allow you to clinch an advantage. So this might be where you can take the knight. It's not such a big deal. Take back. Similar to the game, what happened? Bishop h3. What's the idea? To move the knight and then make the bishop uncomfortable. But no need to trade off that bishop that's awkward on e4. So for example, let's say black does something natural, again a sample line, just to show you what could happen. This was interesting. Knight g5. I mean, maybe you can go back to d2, but I kind of like this knight g5 idea. And now when the bishop goes back, only way to retreat, I don't think you want to try something like f5. No way. Actually, not to mention that the bishop will be trapped after f3. We also have knight e6. Nice hole for the knight to hop into. That's a hole right there. Perfect example of two pawns, the d pawn left, the f pawn left, and that e6 square is a gaping hole, a wound in black's position for the knight to happily hop in there and have a nice outpost. And if it wants, it can take a rook after the fork, or take whatever. It could take anything it wants, or just hang out there and win the next. We could win the bishop with f3. So yeah, that would be a big blunder. So the bishop would have to go back to f5, in which case we can just take it, take back. And I mentioned that the pawn structure around the king is destroyed now. And black has some real problems, and white should have all the chances. So for example, and you could read all my comments on the side if you want to. I can also provide you with the PGN of my comments. So after queen c2, let's say they kick the knight, seems natural, h6. Okay, no problem. Go back to h3. We're heading for greener pastures on f4. We're going to aim into some of the weaknesses in black's position. Now look at that pawn at f5. Only way to guard it is e6. Now we hop in, hitting that pawn again. I don't think that pawn wants to take on d5. That's going to leave the f5 pawn stranded. So I have to try and hold on to that pawn at e6. Okay, now we tear the position open. And after, for example, takes, queen takes, okay, if we take again, if they take on d5, queen takes d5, and I said there's many pores in this position, very porous position for black. So that's not good. Not good. Kind of position, lots of pores, may lead to some infections in the position. Not a good thing. So, yeah, I mean, look at that. d6, h6, f7. Those are all weaknesses. This is a backward pawn, isolated pawns, and weak squares. Knight can go into h5, f6 later on. Bishop's looking here. Queen's looking all over the place. Yeah, not good at all. So that should be a big advantage for white. Okay. So yeah, this is really the benefit of being able to take that bishop. Now in the game, this didn't happen. Where are we in the game? After knight e4, queen b3 was played. Again, allowing black to weaken white's pawn structure, whereas in the other line, white could have weakened black's pawn structure, forcing the doubling of the pawns. Not just any doubling of pawns. You're removing a defender from the king. You're essentially removing a g-pawn. So we can tear things open, get in the g-file, or just kind of maneuver with our pieces and get in front somehow. Try to get in there. But it's weakening of squares in front of the king, allowing pieces to hop around. It's not a good thing, generally speaking. So it just gives us something to work with. It's an imbalance in the position. We need that imbalance to work with something. Squeeze something out of the position. That's what I'm always trying to do. What nuance is there? Some tiny change in the pawn structure that might affect everything, as you can see in that line. At the end of that line, that one weakness, it was decisive. That's what really strong players are able to do. They can see, sort of, mold the position with their mind, see how you can change the pawn structure, and therefore how the pieces will be able to move based on that structure, and how you can exploit weaknesses. And then, based on some tiny thing, gain a decisive advantage. That's really the critical moment in the game, one of them. But I really wanted to harp on that. So after queen b3, good move, knight takes, pawn. Okay, now black has something to work with. Sure, there's pressure on b7, but that's easily dealt with. Queen comes up, and as I said, the pawn, if it needs to, can go to b6, will be supported by the a7 pawn. Queen goes up, rook goes to e1. Okay, so continuing that plan, let me just turn off my volume so you're not hearing the sound of the board. Okay, so after rook goes to e1, bishop goes to e4, trying to stop the pawn. I think it's a reasonable try. I do think it's a reasonable try. It turns out to not really work out. But I guess black doesn't want to see that pawn come. Well, if you know it's going to come anyway, then I guess you just have to kind of hold tight and keep on developing. Get your knight out and say, all right, well, let's say we did knight, I can't even go knight g7. But then that bishop's getting in trouble. Let's say you go knight a6 again. Not really any future for it, but after e4, at least the bishop can retreat. And e5 is not threatened yet. So, okay, it's going to come eventually. Because right now we have queen, pawn, and bishop are all covering this square. If you push, you only have two pieces. So you could simply just take it and win the pawn for now. Although with some weaknesses, but probably black can get away with taking it and then try to roll the center. Maybe that'll benefit black. So, yeah, you don't want to push immediately. But maybe bishop f4, or maybe the knight moves and the pawn goes to f4. But the thing is, black might play the kind of game where you say, all right, come at me. You already have a weakness on c3 and c4. Remember, because since the c3 pawn went away to b2 went to c3, there's no pawn that could defend c4. So that could be really problematic. It's like in a Nietsoj Indian. In the Nietsoj Indian, black gives up his bishop just to create those weaknesses on the queen side, and often has to stave off a king side attack, ward that off just in order to get those double pawns. And that, again, it's about the imbalances. Silman really harps on that in his book, goes into that. So I would definitely recommend Silman's How to Reassess Your Chess. But in this case, black didn't have to give up the bishop. Instead, the bishop stays there, protects the king, and keeps an eye on that c3 pawn. So really, this could be fine for black. Just let the pawn come. If you're really afraid of it, maybe go f6. I don't think you need to, though. So just let the position open up, get ready for it, and once it opens, let there be chaos. It's going to get chaotic. Play loose and be ready to exploit those weaknesses. That's kind of typical hypermodern play. Let them come at you, like in the Matrix, right? Like Morpheus says, just come at me. So bishop e4. There we go. Great move. Yeah, Nietsoj plays a great move. And Rookatronic's been playing well, and now good rejoinder, bishop h3. Says, I want to move the knight and play f3 and kick the bishop out, but it is not so easy. But this move at least enables me to move the knight without trading bishops. Exactly. I said 100%. This is the right idea. You're playing uncompromising chess, as you should. Uncompromising. Don't help your opponent, right? The only way to attempt to punish the wayward bishop by trading it, you are simply alleviating your opponent's burden. And why would you want to do that? So, for example, the alternative line, was it given here? Instead of bishop h3? Yeah, knight h4. So they say I was considering all sorts of knight moves, but none of them seemed to quite work. Yeah, bishop takes. Okay, that bishop was your target. Now you say, hey, go ahead and trade off your target for my bishop, which was protecting my king potentially. And then that gives black everything they need. And then black is moving closer towards an endgame where they might have to not worry about their king after some expansion by white on the center or king side, but can instead look forward to exploiting your pawn on c3, at least tying you down to it. Or maybe black will still play for that b5. I would like to play rook b8 and b5 as black, get those rooks on the b file, keep the pressure on c3. Maybe e6. I don't think we even need it. I like the solidity of that chain. I'm going to play for b5 eventually. And maybe knight d7 to e5, hitting c4, potentially getting the queen to a6. That could be a one pawn later on. Maybe do something interesting like b6, and then you get your queen to b7 and a6 hitting c4. That stuff happens all the time in the Nietsoj Indian, so I'm kind of modeling off that. I'm using this. It's pretty much the exact same structure that you're going to get in a Nietsoj, but usually maybe the e pawn would already be on e6 though, because in Nietsoj Indian after d4, knight f6, c4, e6. So this pawn would at least be on e6, sometimes e5 to lock down the dark squares. Okay, so bishop h3, good move. Knight d7. I was not expecting this move. So expecting bishop f5, bishop takes, g takes. During the game, I thought that this was fine for black, but it is perhaps a bit tricky. Definitely tricky, yeah. Well, just like you have a weak pawn on c4, they have a weak pawn, rookatronic, on f5. So which one's more critical? We'll see, but this one happens to be a weakness that directly affects the king's safety. Now, sometimes you can double up and allow the g file to open. That actually happens later on, where you can utilize the g file. But it's a double-edged sword, but it's something to work with for white. Yeah, I'll actually show you a line I came up with, just a sample line where that pawn could really be. Oh, I'll show you that line where that pawn really became a liability for black. So knight d7, and it still becomes. Oh, there's another one where it still becomes a liability. So after knight d2, forcing the bishop back. Oh, the knight defends. Okay, then you play f3. Good move. Now instead of taking the bishop, that would give black. Yeah, the knight would be coming in, hitting c3. It would give white the bishop pair, but I don't think it's worth it. I think I like f3 because the bishop goes back. So we just trade off bishops. Besides, remember, that was the so-called bad bishop, although on h3 at least it activated. But you trade off that bishop, and now look, you've got the weak pawn on f5. We just have to figure out what to do about it now. And I said again, I'm going to harp on this pawn structure. Notice that the double black pawn on f5 is subject to attack, not to mention that it leaves the king a bit exposed. You can attack it directly or tear open the position and try to get at black's weaknesses based on this pawn structure. So, for example, since the pawn was on g6, previously defending h5 and f5, once you get rid of this pawn on f5, you can just maybe play e4, open up the position, and then you can exploit those squares that used to be defended by a pawn but are no longer defended. So you can play an open game as well. Could be very dangerous for black in this position. So after the bishop goes back, we take it, e4. So this is the option that Nietsoj decided to do, e4. So the other thing you could have done, rather than running into this, was, okay, let's attack the pawn, for example. Queen goes back. Now I was looking at, like, how can we further attack it? And remember that Roy Lopez idea, also the Italian game, you see knight f1 to g3 or e3. So I'm like, let me using that model. So you learn openings, you learn models that are common, we can then apply them across openings. So, or in different middle games. So after, for example, let's say the rook moves over, anticipating the rip open the b file with b5, knight goes to e3, hitting the pawn, forcing e6. And I thought this looks less decisive than in that earlier line. I think the knight was on f4. And the knight is not that impressive on e3. And it seems like black's position is tenable. You're holding everything together. Yeah, I mean, you still have to keep an eye out for the f5 pawn. But as long as you're holding f7, holds e6, holds f5, I think black should be okay here. Maybe I might anticipate white getting some pressure on the d file after an exchange. So maybe white doubles up on the d file, but I think that could be handled. You bring the rook over. And black has some dynamic play here. Maybe black sticks the knight on e5 or something. So it's a double-edged sword, but I don't think black's in big trouble. Black is doing okay here. So maybe this was the best move, e4, the latter option. Just tear open the position instead of directly attacking the weakness. So takes. Now this is another critical moment, taking with the pawn. And again, about understanding of the pawn structure here. Now by understanding this pawn structure, you see when you take, and I think that now you learn that lesson, that after taking, great move by black, knight g4. See, that's a hole on e5. And once the knight gets to e5, it's looking all over the place in the white position. Because all these things are weak. These squares are weak. You got to sort of babysit those squares, I like to say. Babysitting a pawn, babysitting weak squares. We don't want to do that. We want our pieces to be active, not purely on the defensive. So I said this was another key moment. There was an opportunity to not only exert significant pressure on the e file with the rooks, but to do a rook lift over to the king side. How do you do it? Knight takes e4. So I said moments like this where you can coordinate your pieces like this around a clear plan dictated by the pawn structure should be seized whenever you can. So you see if the knight takes, the rook takes. Now what's going on? We have pressure on e7. You can anticipate maybe bishop coming to g5 to hit it again. Maybe that rook's going to come to e1. Beautiful coordination. And we can see that rook swinging along. We call it the rook lift, right? Like the British elevators. Rook lift coming over here, maybe hitting G file, maybe hitting the H file. So then white should really be the one to exploit those weaknesses on the king side. Or at least, again, we don't know for sure, but it's chances. I'll take the chance. If you give me a chance, I'm going to go for it. Force you to at least, hey, if you can defend miraculously, okay, maybe you deserve the draw. But you're going to be fighting for the draw if you're playing with black in this position. So I would have taken that. So that's such a nuance between taking with the pawn of the knight. Now maybe you think, oh, I don't want to trade knights. But again, it's not just about that. Like in the game by Anand, we looked at how by trading pieces sometimes, it actually helps you to exploit weaknesses. So don't be afraid to trade pieces. It's not always a bad thing. I mean, if you're playing for the win, it's not always going to kill your attacking chances. But taking this way, well, now you've given black counter-attacking chances. Suddenly, I like black. We still have that pressure here. The knight's going to be beautiful on e5, great outpost, and it's not so clear what white has. So now suddenly white's put on the defensive, saying, all right, now I have to trade knights, but under a less favorable circumstance than we would have had in the previous situation. So preparing to chop off the knight, and Nietsoj says, after it lands on e5. And I said, unfortunately, due to your slight mishandling of opportunities that the pawn structure provided and your opponent's exploitation of it, now you are on the defensive. Pieces are trading off, and it may near an endgame in which black is doing quite well. Okay, so knight e5. And then Nietsoj says, once this was played, I changed my mind and did not want to trade. The bishop on e5 will be difficult to challenge without creating more weaknesses. Okay, I see. Yeah, we come up to that line later on. So I think this was an interesting try because a good practical choice. Because I mean, if you go for the trade again, you're just going closer to an end game, and there's not much hope there for white in that position. Whereas this is stirring up complications. Now, here's a good rule of thumb: if you're the one who is a better position, you should try and keep it simple. Like for example, especially if you're up pieces. If you're up a pawn, you're up a knight, keep it simple. If you're down a knight, you're desperate. You're gonna do anything you can to create complications. Maybe you'll throw away a rook and do something crazy, or you'll just do anything you can to go all out and maximize your possibilities on the king side, for example. Or maybe you just find a fortress or something. But usually you're gonna do something crazy and just see if you can hang on. But if you're the one who has a great position, like black in this case, they don't want as many complications. So given that white is now put on the defensive, now Nietsoj tries the good practical choice, knight h4. Now, if takes, let's see, this is the line that Nietsoj provides, takes, bishop f4, takes. a bit double-edged, but I thought that black would be quicker to get on the open file. Definitely double-edged. Now, I'm not sure that my concern would be about the open file, because white can easily meet that. Typical defensive technique, like in the art of defense in chess, is to control the open lines if you're under attack. So, for example, if king h8, king h1, rook g8, rook g1, the thing I'm more concerned about is your drying up of the initiative. Because, of course, what's your point in this position? Why are you doing this? To play e5. You see that you have a queen and a pawn here. We have a pawn and a rook. So 2 for 2, we can get away with playing it. Let's see if you have to, for example, let's say king h8, king h1, rook g8, rook g1. Okay, we've met the pressure on the g file, but we've lost our pressure on the e file. No more push, because there was some looseness in white's position. Then white had to become preoccupied with it and then had to give up on their own plans, which is unfortunate. So yeah, I think I agree about the double-edged nature, but this is the main reason, because you don't really get to push necessarily. Okay. Also, again, as we're nearing an endgame, you can imagine if the rook got in the g file in an endgame, can put a lot of pressure on those pawns. Plus the b, again, don't forget about that b5 idea. You can trade off one of the double pawns, but the weaknesses still remain after the double pawns are gone. These are weak squares. So if the rook can get in there somehow, attack those pawns, or one of the pawns, could be significant. Okay, so let's go back. Knight h4, interesting move. e6, I thought that was a great move. I gave an exclamation mark for black. We're looking at good moves for both sides to try and figure out the truth of this position that can be applied elsewhere. So taking away the f square from the knight, f5 square, and in the event of a capture, destroying most of white's center. So if white takes, black takes, and then black has the lion's share of the center. White has lost that critical pawn after pushing, so white loses the space advantage, and the f file gets opened up. So this is a multi-purpose move, which I think is usually a good thing. If you can find one that defends, it attacks, achieves multiple objectives, of course you want to look for something like that. So bishop f4. Nietsoj said, what else should my bishop do? I said, well, maybe something like this. Maybe you can consider rook to f1. I wish we had those arrows in this one. I'm not sure I'm sure there is a way, but rook to f1, putting pressure on the f file. And then you can contemplate bishop g5 to f6, trading off their bishop to open up the king, given that the g file is open. We got to get rid of that bishop, though, so we can get in again, trading off pieces to help us attack, because then there will be no defender on there. So that could be interesting. There's also an idea I'll get into about knight g2 to f4, hitting, again, like in that previous line, where the knight went from h3 to f4, because that's important. We really want to emphasize really those light squares, d5 and e6. So put pressure, just putting pressure. You don't need to often win something, just the pure act of placing pressure, pressurizing your opponent's weak points, ties them down. We want that. I get into that a lot. Very important for moving up to the expert and master levels, or any level you're at. If you can apply that, it'll just help you shoot up, just tying your opponent down. Okay. Bishop f6, looking at the knight. Turns out it's not a big deal. Bishop takes. I don't think I like that. Yeah, why are you giving up the bishop? And now bishop takes h4, I don't like that either. Yeah, they should just take back. And then now you have this uncontested bishop, helps guard the king that we should have traded off. Now it's a great guard and an attacker looking all across the board. Great perch right there. Yeah, I don't think we want to give it up. Who cares if you double the pawns? The king can move over. It shouldn't be a big deal. And actually, there's a tactical problem with bishop takes h4 as well. But again, going here, I wouldn't have taken on e5 in the first place. I would have gone king h1, actually. This is an interesting move to consider. So first of all, there's why bishop f6? Because of these tactical possibilities of a fork. So good idea. Let's remove the defender on h4, and then we can make that fork happen. Okay, prophylactic move. You see a possibility your opponent has, take it away with king h1. That looks good. And then if they take, now we're perfectly prepared for this. Suddenly this move is actually helping white attack. So the double pawn becomes an asset. It's a double-edged sword. In this case, it's an asset. Who cares? We might lose it. Doesn't matter. We got that g file for the rook. We got the dark squares. Bishop's coming in here. Somehow it's going to get in. Combined with the queen, probably just swing back. Maybe sack the c4 pawn. Just get the queen in there. That's looking very, very dangerous for black in that position. So we're fighting for the initiative. A move like king h1 is a defensive move, But if this move happens, it allows white to prepare to take the initiative very, very quickly. Bishop f4 says, what else should my bishop do? When you're asking moves like that, well, it sounds like you're playing planlessly. Like, I'm not really sure where I want to go. I'll just make a move. Don't do that. Always have a purpose. And when you do that, then you might come up with king h1 or the knight g2 idea, but unfortunately it doesn't work now because of the fork. But king h1, and then we might start maneuvering our knight to f4 or maybe e3 or something. I do like that f4 square for the knight, though. I think that's where it belongs. And then again, we could do the bishop g5 to f6 if we can support it, or maybe get the queen behind it, trade off the bishop, and then we're going to start feasting on those weakened squares with our knight and our rook, queen. That's going to look good. Okay, so bishop f6, bishop takes, maybe hoping for bishop takes h4. Of course, again, this is great for black. I think black's doing very well here. But after bishop takes h4, nice move. Now here again, we get that question about desperado as Zwischenzugs. I think it's both. You guys can double check the definition, but I think this would be considered both. So a Zwischenzug is an in-between move. Instead of doing the immediate recapture, we throw in this move, but it's a desperado because you know your piece is going to be lost anyway, so you just toss it away. Just toss away that piece, and then you can recapture. Actually, another in-between move. So after this, we get e5. That's a nice move. I really like that. I think this is where Nietsoj begins to take over the initiative, exploiting the inaccuracies that his opponent, Rukatronic, just made. So if g takes h4, I'm thinking, well, maybe black just goes e5. Okay, theoretically, what? A pawn down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 against 6. It's not that relevant here. I think black is doing really well. Yeah, okay, that pass pawn's a double pass pawn, protected pass pawn. But white's king is pretty open. There's a lot of weaknesses. That's the more important factor, rather than just an extra pawn. That could be an issue in an endgame. But as long as you keep the queens on the board for Rukatronic, I think Rukatronic just goes maybe like king h8 next, gets the rook out, and who cares about the b7 pawn? In the game, actually, that comes back to get white by taking on b7. A bit too greedy. As I talk about in that, well, in Spanish, in the Immortal game that I cover, the greed can sometimes come back to get you if you're too greedy in chess. So more important is the placement of the pieces usually. So unless you could just hold on, say, hey, I'm going to grab the piece and hold on. But in this case, the king is too open. Why help your opponent again? So e5, preventing black from playing e5, getting that moving while you can. I thought, yeah, that's just a fantastic in-between move. Not getting preoccupied over losing the h4 pawn. So if this or this, let's say here, you take, yeah, you're losing this pawn on h4, but you have this pawn coming. You can maybe bring your king over, get some pressure on the g file. At least white is getting some counterplay here. But yeah, the open king is going to be a factor. As it turns out, the open king combined with the b file got white into some trouble. So king h8, that's interesting. Well, black is saying, hey, I want to take advantage of your king immediately, and I could come here afterwards. So yeah, so Nietsoj gives it a dubious move. I think maybe it's interchangeable. Queen takes or king h8, probably not a big deal. Okay, now we have queen takes b7, and as Nietsoj said, the computer thinks this is way too greedy. I agree. We don't need that move. That's kind of going away from our plan. It says, I'm having a hard time seeing why the move is so bad. Then it says d6. This was my plan to establish a strong passed pawn. Yeah, just stick with your plan. When you go away from your plan, usually it's problematic. Again, we saw that earlier with the bishop f4 move. It wasn't quite sticking with the plan. Maybe after, because you were hoping to get e4, e5 in, and then once black took that away based on the pawn structure, maybe you went astray. But you got to get your bearings, take a step away from the board, take a deep breath, come back and figure out how to handle the new situation. That's all that matters now. Forget about what happened. You got to deal with the situation in front of you. Okay, so queen takes b7. And then what do we have? Queen takes h4. Yeah, so it turns out this was actually not, I mean, it's tempting to take the pawn, but it turns out this could really be punished, the queen takes b7, by rook b8. Look at this. Queen has to take. If queen c6, now queen takes h4. Mate, look at that. Computer says mate in 8. That's terrible. d6, okay, we get our hurrah. We get our last hurrah, the pawn push. Okay, the rook infiltrates. No way to control the second rank for white. Game over. Queen h1, for example, guarding this. But now, that's a mate. That's mate on F. The computer, as it points out to us, literally. Queen F2 is a mate. Rook G8 is also going to lead to mate. You can do it however you want. Okay, so unfortunately, Queen takes H4. I'm not sure. Maybe Black still has a chance to win, but Rook B8. I mean, you got to get your rooks on the B file and the G file. That's just terrible. So D6, Rook B8. Rook. Okay, we got it. Rook G8 check. But it says after Queen E4 says, "Will you trade queens, sir?" But see, notice this. After D6, getting that protected passed pawn and enabling the queen to return to the king side. So now we have White who's doing the good multi-purpose moves. They both played a couple of good multi-purpose moves here. But yeah, after Queen E4, it looks like White might be holding the fort together. Rook G. It looks scary. I mean, you have a rook here, have a rook here, and if you get in here, you're going to hit the second rank again, hitting here. But there might be just enough time to get safe. It's very risky, though. You see, based on that, allowing not only the G file, but the B file. That's somewhat suicidal what White did there. And yeah, could have lost, it looks like. After it was completely losing after Queen takes B7, Rook B8. But White got lucky here, as often happens, especially in amateur games, but in every level game. So I say, yeah, it's amazing how the Queen defends everything. If Black had time for Rook B2, they could have some more trouble. But it seems like you've beaten them to the punch. But you have to tread incredibly carefully here because all the Black's pieces. So take. Okay, now we have an endgame. Now immediately there were important decisions to be made in this endgame. Of course, the rook comes in. So you have that really strong pawn on D6, which is going to help you a lot in this endgame. But the rook coming into B2, it looks like Black has something scary. But we need to be objective. We must be objective. After Rook F4, spent quite a bit of time on this move, not really seeing the way forward. Rook D1 seems natural, but after Rook G to G2, I thought that White had a perpetual check. Also, the A pawn is left on pre to be taken, giving Black an outside passer. Sure, but it's much slower. Remember your asset. Your asset is more important than your opponent's asset here. You have to evaluate carefully. I know you're scared. It looks scary, but you have to do a careful evaluation of both of your asset versus their asset. It's like if it comes down to just pawns, we both have an asset, but if yours is one step ahead, yours is the one that wins. So you have to really objectively analyze that. So after Rook G2, D7, yeah, this is probably winning because you have check, moves, check, move. But look, the king is going to hide behind the rook, and this check is coming. You're going to get queen with check. So let's say after here, what else can Black do? Black checks. King moves. There's no way to even set up mate. Yeah, there's this. So Black is threatening a mate, but we get a queen. Now this pawn on E5 I think is going to be important for anchoring the queen. And oh yeah, it's got to be mate. Look at that. King G7. That's a typical mating pattern. No way to stop it. So, oh, that's terrible. Remember, that pawn on E5, remember, it's a wedge. It's like a thorn. Helps you attack the king. Without that pawn, it may not have been that easy for White here. Well, White can always go Rook F2 if the check goes back, but still, those rooks are dangerous. But in this line, White's attack comes first. Black has to go Rook G2 to set up the mate. It's too slow. That rook is really nicely placed here. No perpetual because you stop that check. We'll take the rook if they check here. So it just works out for White here to play Rook D1. That was the one move that really won. And then there's some other lines that you can look at here. There's other lines that I'm not going to get into that Nietsoj analyzed that lead to, they're the computer lines basically. They lead to slight advantages for White, but they're unclear. Rook D1 was the one clear line. And you could look at it too and say, hey, I want to support my pawn. But then you have to ask yourself, does my opponent's counterattack work? Now, a lot of players, I mean, that's good that you at least looked at your opponent's plan. A lot of players would just make this move and then like maybe get in trouble. At least you're considering in the calculation tree, you have to consider your opponent's best move, of course. That's part of good calculation, which makes you a strong player. And then accurate evaluation is the second part, right? At the end of that line. So it turned out that the evaluation was not accurate because you need to follow through all the way, even if it's an ugly looking move, ugly looking situation of allowing the rooks in. That's an important lesson right there that you can maybe take from this game. Make an ugly move if it works. But yeah, that's pretty much the end of well, they agreed to a draw actually. Although White was better. Did they already after Rook F4? I think they agreed to a draw after that move. And it's a murky situation. It's just a murky situation. But yeah, Rook D1 wins. And there's just no way to stop that from queening and mate. Pretty cool ending. So yeah, there are a lot of good lessons in this game, especially relating to pawn structure. Let's just review a couple of quick things. So remember, when you push, you do open up the diagonal. Every pawn move is a potential weakness, and that diagonal became very strong later on. Okay, bishop f5, not a good move, I don't think. You could look at the opening book. Now here, not queen b3. Remember, just take it. But don't, if you're worried about that pressure, don't help them, right? Don't help your opponent. There was quite a bit of that in this game. But I like that you're looking at your opponent's possibilities at least. And of course, you'll improve your accuracy in terms of what decisions are good and not for it to what you can enable your opponent to do or restrict them from doing. Okay, bishop e4, and that's really higher level chess of restriction combined with attack. So this was the moment. Stick. That's a big thing from this game. If you can stick with those plans. Well, you did this. That's good. You did bishop h3. Yeah, you did. Okay, you didn't go. I'm glad you didn't go to h4. You did this. Good. Okay, take advantage of the bishop, and now you get the weakening of the structure. I like e4. Now that was another important move. Don't take back with the pawn. Take with the knight. Get a beautiful setup like this. Lots of pressure, and you're opening the position, going to the king side, and consider directly attacking f5. In this case, I think black is fine, but consider that in certain lines. Okay, and then yeah, now white's kind of on the defensive. Black does well, occupies it. White mixes it up a little bit, being in some trouble, and black does a great job there, controlling f5. Okay, bishop f6, and this is where black really went astray. Once they got deep into this is kind of like a late middle game, almost entering the end game. But there's still a lot of attacking possibilities. But this is where black goes astray. So bishop takes, and then white goes astray, and then black goes astray again. But yeah, if bishop, I love black's position now. Now black can save themselves here. But after yeah, and king h1 would have been great as opposed to taking. Just let the position sit there. Just build up your position, take away the threats, and keep building it. And remember, you still have that f file. Since you took, your only real asset here is that f file. So you got to use that. Plus, again, the b file is not a true asset. But the f file is something to work with, so you got to work with it, got to make use of it, exploit it. But in the game, not so much, I don't think. So this gives black a great opportunity to take you got to take that bishop, but trying to complicate. Well, as we saw, it opened things up. But then white, interesting, it gets totally messy here. Now, I understand black's choice. Even if black saw bishop takes d6, interesting in between move, things still get messy because white's king opened up. Well. I don't see much else. And the bishop could go back to f4. But then what does white really have? I don't see much. So at least white gets a pawn out of this and tries to work with it. But now that e5 moves, very nice. Good job. Takes. King h8. Okay, and remember, or the queen, it doesn't matter. The queen could have taken right away. But remember, after this, just play rook b8. So yeah, this was the key error of the game. Black might have made a strategic error with the bishop, with the knight, taking the knight on h4, but taking on b7, that was a real strategic and tactical error to allow that rook to take the file. Tactics flow from the superior position. Black would get the superior position by getting the two rooks out. But this was too slow, queen takes h4. And then the tactics would flow from that position, as Fisher says. So d6, you're getting something solid to work with, d6. But again, great defense. And now, unfortunately, rook a b8, a move too late, and then white ends up going into an endgame. Great queen on e4. I don't know. I mean, I think black should have tried to keep queens on the board, but black trades, comes in, hoping for something in here. But that d6 pawn is really what makes the difference. And again, you got to go rook d1 there. Stick with if you see that idea, try to make it work. Try to make your intuition work. If it's your intuition to do that, it's probably the right move. I would guess more than probably 60–70% of the time, your intuition is going to be correct. So test your intuition, look into it, see if it works, try to make it work, fight for it to work, fight for your ideas. I think that's one of the main things that you can take away from this game. So really interesting game. Thanks for sharing, and thank you for providing your own analysis. And I look forward to more people either sending me your games, or maybe we'll do like a live thing where we both analyze it simultaneously. Or yeah, there's so many ways we could do it. Or just send me your comments like Nietsoj did. So great job. Keep those things in mind. Really fight for your ideas and think about that pawn structure as well. All right, thanks and good luck.